Welcome back to the Big Fight Reaction. It is the reaction show for Canelo Golovkin 3. Didn't live up to the hype, is the first words I'm going to use, and I'm sure we'll have many conversations around how this fight played out during the course of the episode. Many differences of opinion and points of view on it. It wasn't what we thought it was going to be. There was no big drama show. Canelo came back and looked as good as he did before, and that's mainly what I took away from this fight, and also the fact that Golovkin did seem to slow and be more evident in this fight than what it was maybe in the previous fight against Ryota Murata. So, Johnston, I'm going to bring you in just to start this show off. We was hoping for a big drama show. We was hoping for a really highly competitive fight, and the scorecard suggests that it was quite a highly competitive fight. Although I didn't feel that it was as competitive as what the scorecard suggested on this occasion. I did feel Canelo, I think for the most part, dominated most of the fight, and Golovkin seemed to come alive a little bit in round 9 onwards. But it was disappointing from a Golovkin standpoint, as I know you're a big Golovkin fan. But in another way, it was also nice to see Canelo bounce back from that loss to Bivol and actually adapt his game plan, be more aggressive, have more than one game plan, and use different movements and feints in the ring to actually confuse Golovkin on a few occasions. So it was nice to see the adaptations he's made for the Golovkin third fight. What did you take out of this fight? Is there a sort of summary you can describe to the listeners, like how you feel sort of this sums the fight up best?
Well, I think Golovkin had a completely different game plan to the one we've expected from him. He seemed to want to take his time in approaching the fight, and he was very standoffish, which is something we've not seen from Golovkin. I think he was a bit worried about what was coming back for a change, which is something we've not seen either. And the age is clearly a problem. He was a lot slower, and it's almost like he knew that he was never going to really impose himself onto Canelo in that first half of the fight, and just sort of hope that he can sort of tap his way through. But even then, he didn't even really use that ramrod jab. He's got one of the best jabs in the business. He didn't establish that at any point. It was very reluctantly thrown, and he just allowed Canelo to dictate the pace of the fight, push him back as he pleased. And yeah, it just wasn't a good performance from Golovkin, and he looked old very quickly. And yeah, so the second half of the fight, he seemed to put his foot down a little bit. He pretty much Canelo allowed him to do that. I feel that Canelo probably thought he knows he's winning the fight. It was 6 rounds up, 7 rounds up, pretty clear. And then he sort of backed off a little bit, allowed Golovkin to come at him with some shots. But there was a moment at one point where he sort of threw an overhand right, which I felt that Canelo felt, but it didn't trouble him as such. He didn't follow up on it. And maybe he felt when he landed that, maybe he probably felt I probably could have gone a little bit earlier. I think he was worried about not finishing the fight. I think he wanted to finish this fight on his feet. And I feel that he had literally allowed those first few rounds to just escape him. And then he was going to put the pressure on because he felt that was what his body could do. He's a 41-year-old man now. He's nowhere near the level we've seen of him. And I think that was evident for us. I'm a Golovkin fan. I've never shied away from that. I'm a huge fan of his. But there was no debates about this one. And he looks pretty far away from Canelo now. I mean, the fact that they waited so long for this third fight, I think it just shows. He got his money and left. And I sort of, because I love Canelo so much, and I've watched so many of his fights and enjoyed them so much, I sort of feel like, well, he took his payday and went home. And I've got no problems with that, to be honest. I know people get the ump with that, but look, it's you got to earn your money at the end of the day. And he's got a shitload of money from this Canelo fight. And he just wasn't he was a shadow of himself, wasn't he? That's about as simple as I can put it.
Well, you say you love Canelo. I think you meant Golovkin, didn't you?
Golovkin, sorry, yes, I do that a lot, don't I? Jesus, yeah, Golovkin. I do like Canelo, but yeah, I'm a huge Golovkin fan. Golovkin, Triple G, and
Yeah,
yeah, I just think he took his money and went, mate.
yeah. I wouldn't go as far as saying that. I'll be honest, I felt like Canelo was just the younger, fresher man, and he's shown and it proved it. And I hate using the cliches. I know sometimes I use them quite a lot, admittedly, but it does look like he got old overnight. It does. It just kind of felt like this was the fight that really demonstrated that he was slowing down. And I think what was evident about that was some of the punch stats in it. I mean, in the second fight, he was Golovkin, was throwing about 18, 19 punches around. In this, it was like 7 or 8. Do you know, like in terms of what he was landing, not so much throwing, but landing. So he wasn't throwing as much throughout the course of this fight. He did seem reluctant. I agree with that. And at times I was watching his sort of body language, and I'm no expert in this, but I could see, sort of midway through the fight, you could see, he was taking deep breaths in through his nose, out through his mouth. It was like the stamina aspect of his body was starting to give up a little bit earlier than what it maybe would have done 2 or 3 years before. Like, you train yourself so much for a fight, and it's different being able to train in the gym than what it is actually fighting. You fight condition yourself, and what I mean by that is all the sparring that you do is to condition yourself to be able to handle a fighter for 3 minutes of a round. And I think the conditioning, I'm not saying it was off point. I just think that his body was just telling him in that ring that night that this is you now. You're not the 30 something man anymore. You're 40. You're going on to 41. You're in your 41st year of your life. Like, his body is telling him that he can't do it what he able to be used to do. Like, when we see him, his effective, destructive knockouts of people, and the way he would be consistently ferocious throughout the course of a fight. This fight was just like a tame version of him. Like, his body wasn't able to do what his mind wanted it to do, and that's the best way I can describe it. There could be a completely different reason. I've not heard anything in the press post fight. Golovkin's quite a humble sportsman. He's not going to come out and make a load of excuses up. I think age got the better of him. Canelo came back. He made the adaptations for this particular fight. He looked at his Bivol loss, made some changes, wanted to solidify himself in this trilogy, and has done so by doing that, and looked good. I think he looked good in the fight. Canelo, we've got to talk about him too, because he's the winner here. He's the man that obviously moves on and solidifies himself in this trilogy. He's got this great legacy of the trilogy on his record now, and he moves forward. And for me, it leads nicely into sort of like the aftermath of this fight, what it means for both men. Where do they go? And starting with the winner, of course, Canelo. He's defended his undisputed super middleweight titles. Does he go straight in for that Bivol rematch? Because I know he wants it. He said he wants it. There's also talk of David Benavidez, but he's saying in the post-fight press conference that, he doesn't want to fight him, not because he's a Mexican. He doesn't want to fight him because of the fact he's done nothing, Benavidez. Now, Benavidez is the interim WBC champion, so he's earned his shot at the WBC title, essentially. But because of Canelo and that star power he brings to the table, I think he can just pick and choose who he wants to fight now. It doesn't matter whether, there's an interim belt there for Benavidez, whether it gets made mandatory, whether Canelo ends up losing his WBC belt as a result. I don't think he will care at this point. I think what Canelo wants to do, and this is my interpretation of what he's been saying, is that he just wants legacy now. He wants these big fights, these big legacy fights. And I honestly think he will look for the winner of Bivol versus Gilberto Ramirez. And I think he will go for the winner. And I think he'll try and jump up again. I don't think it's the best of moves, personally. We said this last time when he lost to Bivol, but I think he'll do it. I think he'll do it. I think he'll want to try and create that history and, be a legit, not over the hill light heavyweight, someone who's absolutely in his prime. And I think he'll want to try and right that wrong. That's kind of my interpretation of what I've heard from him. But obviously, something completely different could happen in the interim.
Yeah, I think we can. Look, Benavidez is the man. I feel that he probably is the guy to fight. He's the younger guy. A lot of people are calling for Benavidez, especially sort of overseas, and across the other side of the pond, everyone's pretty much saying that he's scared of him. And I think to put that to bed, I think you need to face him. People are going to always look for another opponent that he hasn't faced and try and push their name and push the envelope and say, look, this guy could beat you, and he's afraid of him. He doesn't want to fight him. He's clear as day. He doesn't want to fight him. But look, for me, I think that's that. He's a bigger guy. I think he's great preparation if he wants to really push himself up into the light heavyweight division, because I don't think Benavidez is going to be a super middleweight for much longer. I could see him being a middleweight for another couple of years, and then after that, I think he moves up because he's a big guy. He's a very big guy, and as I say, he's good preparation for someone like a Bivol if he wants that rematch, and that's if Bivol gets through Ramirez. Ramirez, I think his last fight stepped in the ring over 200 pounds. He's going to be a heavyweight in that ring. Bivol's going to have to really impose himself like he did against Canelo, but can he do that against such a bigger guy? It's going to be interesting for Bivol to see if he can get through that. And I'll give him huge respect and credit if he does, because that's a big, big fight. But yeah, saying that, I think he's going to wait for it. I think Bivol is even openly suggested he move down to super middleweight to fight Canelo after Ramirez, whether he wins or loses. Yeah, I mean, look, whether Canelo just he wants to get that rematch, it seems like he wants to, but I think the Benavidez fight, Sean, I don't see why Canelo doesn't take that fight. I don't understand it. He says he hasn't faced anyone. Look, he is the guy that everyone's throwing everyone's name around, and he is a good fighter. He's a big guy, big imposing guy. He's got a good jab. He's strong. Prove yourself. If you want to prove yourself to be the best, you've come through the Golovkin fight. You've struggled against Bivol. Beat him. I don't see what the big deal is and why I don't want to face him. So for me, I think that should be the next step, just to put those doubters to bed. But I don't see like he wants it.
It's interesting because, like, he's saying in the post-fight presser, like, people are assuming he doesn't want to fight him because he's another fellow Mexican. And Canelo said in relatively decent English, which he's getting better at as well, is the fact that it's not because he's Mexican. He doesn't want to fight him because he doesn't believe Benavidez brings anything to the table. And you can get the sense of feeling that for him, it is about legacy fights. It is about money, and more importantly as well, what does Benavidez bring to the table in terms of the financial aspect of it? Does he bring good financials? Boxing's always going to be a business before it is a sport, unfortunately, and I think that will play a factor in why this fight may or may not happen. I agree with you. Like, I look at it and think, every person that has said they want to fight Canelo in the super middleweight division, who we've thought maybe would give him difficulties in that division, he's beaten. He beat Billy Joe Saunders. He beat Caleb Plant. He beat Callum Smith. He beat them three top guys in that division. So there's no reason why he can't go again and fight another top guy in the division. I don't think it's because he's trying to duck him. I don't think it's a case of he thinks he could be beaten by him. I don't think he's not scared of losing, is it? At the end of the day, we can tell that now. He's lost to Mayweather and he's lost to Bivol. There is 2 losses on his record. He's not scared of protecting a record, so to speak. But I think it is more business than it is the sport side of it now. I think he's thinking, what am I going to make from this fight? How much could I make from this fight? And unfortunately, I think that seems to be the mentality I'm getting the interpretation of. I hope it's not, because he seems very hungry still in his early 30s. He seems like, he's got a good couple of years left at this top level before maybe we will then start to see some decline, with his age. I think he's got a good couple of years left, and I think he's looking for them big, big fights, and maybe he knows it. Maybe he knows himself where he's at and where his body's at, and if he's realistic about it, he'll look at it and go, right, well, maybe I've got 2 or 3 years left before I really start to see the sort of declines, within training and the camps that they do. And maybe then he's looking at it and thinking, look, I need big fights. I've got to have big, big, big fights. I think Benavidez is a big fight in America. It gets perceived as a big fight over there. I see it as a big fight because he's the legit challenger now to the undisputed crown. He's the guy that I think is definitely next in line for a shot at Canelo in the Canelo bandwagon. I can't see anybody else other than him moving up to light heavyweight again.
That's it. Demetrius Andrade. He's the only other one, isn't he?
But he doesn't want to fight either. He's avoiding everybody. He doesn't. He's saying people are avoiding him. But his last fight that was scheduled was to fight our very own Zach Barker. I mean, all due respect to Zach, he's done nothing in the sport. He's done nothing major in this sport yet to warrant a huge fight like that. But yet he got it, and I believe it is being rescheduled. So you said Demetrius Andrade. That's the only other name that you threw out there that I could think of that in the interim would be a good match for Canelo.
But Benavidez is head and shoulders the man, isn't he? He's the man. Let's be honest. Yep. If you're going to look at anyone in the super middleweight division, you hold all those titles, you got to fight the next challenger. You got Bivol fighting Ramirez. I don't see what the problem is. I'll be honest with you. He's going to earn money no matter what, Canelo. And if he wants to, I mean, we keep talking about this, and he keeps producing the goods. He didn't do it against Bivol. But if he wants to be defined as a great, then he can't be seen as hiding from anyone. You can't just throw out the fact that, okay, I ain't going to sell as many tickets. That's not a good enough answer for us as people that love the sport. That's not good enough. That isn't good enough. That is a way for other people to then say he's scared of him. Just fight the guy. I don't see what the big deal is. He's the next guy, isn't he? Let's be honest. I said Andre, but look, let's be honest. He is not. He's undefeated, but he ain't fought anyone really of any real credibility for him to hold on to that undefeated record. It's almost like he's fighting to hold on to his own, that gives you bad publicity, especially from us, Sean. But yeah, I mean, look, Benavidez wants to fight, it's a great option. It's a good fight. Take it. And then after that, if you are successful, then you can fight Bivol if you want that rematch. And I'll say it again, it's good preparation for if he really wants to fight the bigger guys.
So what about Golovkin then? This is the next part of the conversation. Is like, is it just a straight talk of retirement? Can you see him being back in the ring once more, maybe for a farewell fight? I don't know. It's got to be one or the other for me. I genuinely, I don't think he's Bernard Hopkins. I don't think he's going to defy the odds and the age and be able to do that. I think there's only very few that can do that in the sport, and we've seen only what two, Bernard Hopkins and George Foreman, the two that stick out in my mind as older guys that have gone on to be able to win titles in their respective divisions. Can Golovkin do it again? Could he move up to light heavyweight possibly? Or is it just enough for him now? I mean, he's been a long-standing middleweight champion, and he is still classed as middleweight champion. Does he defend the titles back down at middleweight? Does he seek a big fight down there? Or does he just say, do you know what? I'll retire as middleweight champion. Yeah, I lost the undisputed super middleweight title fight, but what else is there for me to do? There's kind of three things I'm throwing around there. What do you think? Does he stay back down at middleweight, fight again, defend his titles that he has there? Does he go back at super middleweight, fight again in another big fight or farewell fight, or does he just retire? Which one of the three really would you prefer to see, and which one do you think will happen?
For me, look, the crazy thing is I mean that for that trilogy, I was quite surprised on two of the judges' scorecards. They had it quite close. I didn't have it close at all. I had Canelo winning that by about 4 or 5 rounds. I thought, as I say, Golovkin was a shadow of himself. But even saying that, he still has the ability to probably beat every middleweight in that division. And that's no disrespect to those guys. I just think, you're talking high level here, and even at 40, even though his timing was off, I think against guys where he won't be as what's the word, I suppose, I've never seen him be so negative, and I think that looked bad on Golovkin. Look, he's an old man. You always got to adjust your style. We've seen it throughout the years. You look at the young Cassius Clay, for instance, that then become Muhammad Ali. They're like two different people. The way he fought in the ring were different. You have to mold yourself into a different fighter, and I don't quite think Golovkin has that. So therefore, as you say, I think personally, either hang them up and surrender and just say, do you know what? Look, the age has crept in, and I think that's enough for me. And people will still, like myself, will still rate him as one of the greatest middleweights of all time. I generally believe that. I feel like people avoided him, and his record wasn't as great as what he could have been. But still, I still feel like living through that era, people were petrified of Gennady Golovkin, including Canelo. That's why it took him so long to take their first fight and in their third fight, because he was so strong. So for me, I think I would say goodbye. But as you say, maybe another bit of money and he goes away with a win. If there's anyone in particular I would love to see him beat two piles of shit out of, would be Chris Eubank Jr. I would love to see him fight Chris Eubank Jr. and put him away. Look, maybe Hammy Munguia is another one, isn't he? He's a guy but that would be a tough fight for him. Maybe, but that could be fireworks. Is there a problem moving back down to middleweight as well? I don't know. Maybe he generally. I feel like he has to really boil himself down, and I think those body shots against Murata, I think they were quite evident, and I think if he drops back down to middleweight, has to boil himself down, then body shots are going to take more effect. So look, either have one of those fights where you say goodbye to boxing and it's just a layup for him, or you retire. For me personally, being a fan of his, I don't see no problem with him walking away from the sport.
I don't see no problem with him walking away from the sport either. I think people will obviously just look at it and say, well, he's still middleweight champion. He's still got belts in the middleweight division. Why can he not fight another middleweight? Well, then when you rightly point out like the middleweights that are around at the moment, who really is worthy other than Jaime Munguia and maybe Chris Eubank Jr. But Chris is obviously fighting Conor Benn in this catchweight fight, so that puts him out until next year at least. Jaime Munguia, obviously, he fought Jimmy Kelly in his last fight and looked good in getting the win. He doesn't have any fights scheduled in at the moment. Is it a possibility for next year? Could Golovkin go and beat this Mexican protege in the middleweight division? There's a chance for that. But again, I wouldn't be overly disappointed if he just said, you know what, that's it now. My body's telling me one thing, even though my mind wants me to carry on. And I wouldn't have sort of any complaints. I'd be gutted to see him retire because, he was an absolute force at his best. I still felt like there was something left in him before this fight. I did say, I felt like he was at the peak of
Yeah,
his
same
powers.
here.
I did say that, and maybe it looks like I'm kind of eating my words a little bit here because he's kind of looked a little bit slow and ponderous in this Canelo fight, but this happens. Who are we? We can't predict how this will go down. We can only give our own personal predictions of how we think fights go down. And what's happened there is he just didn't look the same as he's done before. So that to me indicates that he's declining. He's really slowing. He's getting hit with more shots than what he ever did before. He's not quick off the mark as he once was. And if you're that point of your career, regardless of who you're fighting, whether it's a Canelo or whether it's just a layup fight, it's time to call it a day. It's time to sort of step away from the sport. And Golovkin seems like the type of guy who's completely had his head screwed on his whole professional career. And I think when he's ready to call it a day, he will. Whether it's now or whether it's after one farewell fight or one big championship fight in the middleweight division, he hasn't got much longer left. I think that's what I'm trying to say in a roundabout ways. He hasn't got much longer left either way. But what he's done for this fight is they've brought the curtain down finally on this trilogy and finally given us what we wanted, albeit a couple of years later than what we wanted, which, there will be arguments about that, of course. People will say, well, if this was Gennady Golovkin 2019 version of him, different fight completely. We can't say what would have happened. That time has now passed. He is an older man. Things are probably not the same as they were then for him physically. So we can never really say how things would have gone. As much as we like to fantasize about it, we're never going to know that now. What we can maintain is that he should have won that first fight, and that second fight was quite close, closer than this third fight in particular, and that he was in with a shout for possibly a draw in that second fight. But there was no mistake in this third fight. There was no mistake in that Canelo was the dominant fighter in the fight, and that Golovkin just didn't look himself, and it looks like, age is catching up on him.
Yeah, and I also think that as in you say, you try and think about what different a fight it would have been if it had happened a couple of years earlier. It took like 4 years to get their third one on. And I do believe that Canelo did make those adjustments in that second fight, and I still favoured the draw. But I could still give that fight to Golovkin. I think the one thing I will say is for me it's 1-1 with a draw. That's how I see it. I'm never going to change my mind on that. So the record you may look at and you may suggest actually he lost. Canelo's a better fighter. That isn't true. He is now. Canelo's a better fighter now, and I think that was one thing with Canelo. Throughout the years of watching these two, is that was always the aim for him, is to finally get Golovkin when he was too old, and that's what he got. He got it, but people will still put a question mark over that and say you should have fought him earlier, and even their first fight he should have fought earlier. A lot of people, you got to remember, he wasn't even fighting. I think he fought as a middleweight. He jumped up above middleweight as well to fight before he got that first fight on. He was biding his time because he knew of the threat of Golovkin, and that is Canelo doing that. So, and Canelo's one of the top dogs around. Look, end of the day, I'm a Golovkin fan, and I just hope that he does. If he does have one more fight, fine. Defend your titles and then finish on a loss. Fantastic. If it doesn't, you don't want to do that, and you decide actually, do you know what? This is it for me. I've got no qualms with that either. And I will say that as I say, as a fan, I've enjoyed watching him. And anyone that hasn't, then you're bullshitting yourself, because he was great fun to watch. Let's be honest.
Yeah, it's been great fun to watch. Let's see what happens. Let's see how
Yeah.
things play out. We've done 20 minutes on Golovkin Canelo. Let's just move on to some of the other results over the weekend as we come towards the end of this reaction show. So, other fights on the card that we wanted to briefly discuss was Jesse Rodriguez, Israel Gonzalez. Now, Jesse Rodriguez, he's the new sensation, isn't he? He's been the guy that's
Yeah.
kind of seemingly come from nowhere, last minute replacement, steps up in weight, becomes champion, gets a great win over obviously Rung Vasai in his last fight in June, and then comes in against Gonzalez, gets a really good decision over him on two cards, and then one card had him 114, 113, which was a really strange card, given the fact that the other two judges had him way ahead, way dominating this fight. Now, I've caught the fight, and I thought it was quite a good control performance from Rodriguez. I don't know what other people think. I mean, people might disagree with me on that, and to be fair, you can. That's fine. But I just kind of felt it was What are we expecting out of the guy? What are we expecting? Are we expecting knockouts in every fight? Are we expecting drama shows in every fight? Can't always be like that. He had a really solid guy in front of him, and he had a difficult time in the eighth round. Got obviously a point taken off him for a low blow in that round as well. So he had his moments in that fight. People will then judge him based on that. Like you say, you're only as good as your last fight. He didn't look as good as what he did in previous fights, but I still think he's solid and he's still young. He has still got time to mature. He's still got time to move on. You've got to remember the guy's 22 years of age. Like, I think we all
Crazy.
forget that fact about him. I think it was a very good learning fight for him and the type of fight that he needed coming off the back of that real confidence booster win over Rungvisai.
I do, and the one thing about Gonzalez, the guy that he faced, he had gone a distance with Chocolito, and from that point, I realised that this guy's no pushover, and anyone that felt that he was a pushover, you were wrong. I think the general consensus, from what I gathered, was the fact that he's either going to stop him later in that fight, or it's going to go the distance because he was such a strong opponent, and it was a great fight. It was action packed, always, you know there's always this way. You're guaranteed that these guys are gonna be throwing a lot of punches in a lot of time, and that's what happened. It was just two guys having a brawl, and there were moments where Bam Bam like literally pushed him back, and he was looking great, and it looked like he might get the stoppage, and then the low blows in there. There's a couple of low blows. One, it sort of hit in the bladder. I wouldn't say it hit him in the buttocks. As he swung up, maybe he just clipped the end of his knob or something. I don't know. There's no look. I'll be honest with you. I think he made a bit of a meal of it, and he took him. He decided to try and take his time with it, and the referee allowed him to do that, which is fine. But look, for me, Rodriguez won the fight. Yeah, he was the better fighter on the day, and it's a bit of a difficult one coming from those two fights, big fights, to mentally get yourself ready to fight a guy that no one really is giving much credit. Everyone feels that you're going to knock him out. You've knocked out Rungvisai, and now all of a sudden you're going to knock everyone out. He was an older guy, a bit like Golovkin that he got rid of there. And I think that sometimes the motivation isn't there. And I think that's what pretty much happened. I think the motivation wasn't quite there. He was in a Canelo card in front of all these Mexicans, that are watching Canelo, wants to prove himself. And therefore, his naive self allowed himself to engage and want to have a dogfight rather than show his boxing abilities. He can mix it up, and I feel like he failed to do that. But even still, he is one of the best fighters around. He will be a superstar. There's absolutely no way about it. And I think maybe the motivation and then the platform he was on, I think that's where he failed to deliver as such as what people have suggested. I don't think he failed to deliver. I don't agree with that. I just think that he wanted to really prove himself as this tough American, and he can go toe to toe with anyone and get rid of him. And unfortunately, he come up against the guy that was tough. And that's what happens in the sport. And it's a learning curve. It's a great learning curve for him. But I still believe he's still there. He can be the man to really challenge Estrada and Chocolito, especially Chocolito. I feel like Chocolito will beat Estrada in the next fight, but we'll go into that another day.
Well, Amo Williams picked up the UD over Kieran Conway after putting him down in round 9. A relatively decent performance, actually, from Amo Williams. He's someone that, as we've watched his career progress, he started to improve, and he come up against a difficult guy in Kieran Conway, who obviously we know over here as someone who's really started to improve himself. He stepped up to this level, and I think he's proven that he belongs at this sort of level in terms of fighters that are on the way up, fighters that are at a stage of their career where they're going to push on for world honors. I think sort of Kieran Conway sits in that benchmark as a fighter that you would get in the ring with if you want to prove your past your domestic level, whether it be UK, whether it be America and European and obviously that region. I think he's the sort of fighter you go in there, and he did well, Hamo Williams, but he looked very hittable in that fight. He looked easy to hit in that fight, I felt. And I know Felix Cash, in particular, another fighter of ours in the UK, has mentioned he really wants the Amo Williams fight and that, he will do some damage to Amo Williams. That would be a really good fight. That's something that actually genuinely excited me seeing him put that out on social. Was that, for you US fans who listen to us, go and check Felix Cash out if you haven't seen him. He's very much a very all action, all aggressive fighter, but has shown vulnerabilities himself in fights. I mean, one of his most recent fights, bloody hell, it was very, very close, weren't it? It was a really, really difficult fight for him, Felix Cash, in his last fight. And
Yep.
I think one of them things that I take away from guys like Ammo Williams is that he's bringing this reputation with him, and I think Felix Cash is seeing like Ammo Williams is getting put on these big cards, which he is. He's been put on quite a few big cards recently, and I think Felix Cash looks at that and probably sees it as a stepping stone for him to move forward in his career. Because obviously he's fighting a lot on the DAZN UK shows that are over here. Not getting put on like the Canelo undercards, though, is he? Like Ammo Williams is, and I think that's kind of like what he's seeing here is a guy where he thinks he can beat him, and he thinks he can use him as that stepping stone to move forward. Just a couple of seconds, really, on Ammo Williams, Johnston. What you think about him? What you think about a potential fight with Cash in the future?
I'd like to see it. I think, yeah, look, with Golovkin, whether he's going to have one more fight and disappear, they've got these middleweight titles. The middleweight division in particular is one where it's open to anyone that wants to really bring it on and produce the goods. And Williams is one of those guys where potentially he has that ability. I think it might be a bit more too much potential around him. I think he needs to cut more of these fights. Felix Cash is another one. So these guys are going to be in a bit of a bidding war to push themselves into contention for a title. And it makes sense. It's boxing. Let them fight.
So, other results from that particular card then. Ali Akhmedov got a UD over Gabriel Rosado, which I highly expected. I did actually pick this for in our prediction league, Johnston. I did say, this will be a UD. And
Yeah.
he kindly delivered Rosado. He kindly was able to go in there against Akhmedov and prove how tough he was in a pretty good fight as well there. Diego Pacheco, 15-0, now moves to 16-0 with a TKO in the fifth round against Enrico Calazo. Aaron Aponte went to a split decision draw against Fernando Angel Molina. Mark Castro got a victory in the fifth round with a KO over Kevin Montiel Mendoza. And Anthony Herrera won by technical decision after 5 rounds were completed. McKinley, his opponent, was unable to continue due to an accidental headbutt. And that rounds up the results for the Canelo card. Just briefly then, moving back over to the UK, I think it's only right we should mention the Wasserman boxing card that was on Channel 5 here in the UK this past weekend, headlined by Gavin Gwynn, Craig Woodruff. A majority draw in this particular fight. Really, really good, tough slugfest. I think it seemed to be a lot harder than what I was expecting it to be for Gavin Gwynn. I genuinely felt like Gavin Gwynn, he had this before it, and I opted to go for Gavin Gwynn on a UD because I thought, he doesn't knock people out. He systematically breaks them down and wins via points, and this is kind of why I felt that would be the case. But I think Craig Woodruff, he had a really good fight. He had a really good performance, and some people suggest maybe he was slightly unlucky in that particular fight.
Yeah, I do. I feel that Woodruff probably just nicked it, to be honest with you. I thought he'd done the better work. He made Gwen miss several times in that fight, and I think he made him look pretty average. And Woodruff was decent, man. He's showing some of that bobbing and weaving style, hands low. I quite like that style. It's quite good to watch at times. And yeah, I think Gwen was sort of struggling to really pin his man down. And so for me, I think Woodruff probably just deserved to nick it. I sort of thought as we were approaching the end of that fight, I thought this was going to the draw. When I see Terry O'Connor as one of the referees, I sort of automatically assumed that Gavin Gwynn's going to get the card. And sure enough, he did. It was pretty obvious to me, but I don't think Gwynn really done enough to win the fight. I think if anyone did, it was Woodruff. So draw, fine. They get it on, I think, again, at some point. There might be a big card happening in Wales at some point at the end of the year. So maybe you might find that on the undercard.
So other results from that card of note for us then, Lyndon Arthur back with a TKO in the sixth round. Troy Williamson got a TKO also in the sixth round as Benitez's corner threw in the towel. David Benitez, who he was fighting, and it's been confirmed that he is fighting Josh Kelly in December of this year. A big fight for the Northeast.
Brilliant.
Huge fight. And we've said Josh Kelly needs a big fight. We said Troy Williamson needs a big fight. In fact, I think we even coined for this fight to happen earlier on this year when talking about this particular division. So it's nice that at the end of the year we're finally getting to see it. It's a Going to be a really intriguing, great fight, and I'm looking forward to covering that one in December as the time comes. The rest of the card was filled with local prospects, many of the guys that I've met and interviewed before: Jake James, James Moorcroft, Joe Howarth, Corey O'Regan, Kyle Lamotte, Lerone Harrison, Samir Aftab, Reese Woods, all on that card. Reese Woods, unfortunately, getting the defeat against Serge Ambono, journeyman in the UK, someone who is on the circuit all the time. Sprung an upset on that particular card against Reese Woods. Really, really interesting show there at Bolton White's Hotel in Bolton in Greater Manchester. And that is pretty much the main fights of this weekend. All the big fights that we've covered, all the fights in the UK that we've covered. It's, as always, been great to cover the boxing for the weekend.
Sorry to interrupt you, Sean. Just one more. Just a big shout out Denzel Bentley as well, getting his win against Morrison. And the only other one I wanted to say, one last thing, was I got a pal man who plays I play football with. His name's Ross McGuigan. He fought at Yorkall, 36-year-old cruiserweight, and he's having a go at the professional ranks and looking for the Southern Area title in the cruiserweight division, and he won as well. So just a big shout out to Ross McGuigan.
Well, I forgot about Denzel Bentley's fight. I did actually predict Bentley's fight to end between 4 and 5, and I completely forgot to mention it. Bang on, yeah, exactly, bang on the money. And yeah, big shout out to Ross as well, of course. You know, he's someone that you know personally. You know, he's boxing, goes into his third fight, gets his win. You know, same age as me. He's in the boxing ring. It's mad that he's taking up the boxing so late on in his life. But you know, if he's going to make a good go of it, he's got nothing better to do than go to the York Hall, because it's a great place to learn your trade and ply your trade in this sport. So big shout out to you, Ross. Thank you for tuning into our pod as well. Big shout out to you for that. Well, that's it, isn't it, Johnston? That's it for this show. We've got another show coming up very, very shortly. Joyce versus Parker, big fight coming up this weekend. That'll be released pretty much as soon as this one's released. So if you finish listening to this, the chances are you'll probably see that Joyce versus Parker big fight preview is already out there. So please go and listen to that. Really excited to talk about that particular fight and some of the fights that are happening over the course of this coming weekend as well. That's it for this episode. Thank you for listening. Make sure you tune in to us on every available podcasting app. If you are an Apple user, you can find us on Apple Podcast. If you're an Android user, Google Podcast is usually the best place, or any available podcasting app. Find us on Twitter at BTR Boxing Pod, and Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, BTR Boxing Podcast Network. That's it for our big fight reaction show, and we'll see you in our next episode, the big fight preview, Joyce versus Parker.